So much like we did yesterday, I want to introduce Dan Sloan, longtime CNU member. I think you were at Alexandria. He's currently serving on the board, but more importantly, he will be introducing our keynote speaker today, Dr. Antwi Akom. So Dan?
Good morning. From the day of the CNU's founding, social equity has been part of its DNA. The organization advanced mixed income housing so that all income groups can share the same sidewalks, cafes, parks, and community. The organization advocated neighborhoods where the money going towards cars could instead go toward daily needs, medical, food. You could abandon the car. This resulted in a charter in the late 90s that said neighborhoods should be diverse in use and population, that we represent a broad-based citizenry, that affordable housing should be distributed throughout the region to match job opportunities and to avoid concentrations of poverty. This DNA resulted in CNU having major influence on the Hope 6 program, which returned HUD to the notion of building respectful housing. This DNA has been manifest in the work of members like Emily Talon, who wrote Design for Diversity, Exploring Socially Mixed Neighborhoods, Gianni Longo, Jackie Grimshaw, and many more of you who have populated the CNU's committees and initiatives. In 2014, it led to CNU's discussion of equity in transportation, where Dr. Mindy Fullilove issued a challenge to us all.
You know, you're here for 3 days. Why not? Just go big. Don't even worry about how it relates to policy or the realities back on the ground. You're here. Just enjoy. Be with each other. Hang out. What if you say, look, we're in a mess. How would we get out? What would be the vision? Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. What would be the vision that would draw us towards an equitable future? Congress of New Urbanism did that in promoting walkable cities, and they challenged sprawl, and that was a great thing for the society. Come back with your, that was your right hook, come back with your left hook and knock out injustice in America. Thank you.
Amen.
Wow. So the Congress has produced dozens of concepts and led numerous discussions that have benefited people of all ethnic groups or social strata. But allow me a metaphor for a moment, and this may sort of continue Doug's science theme. But imagine with me a great, vast wheat field undulating over the hills, a solid continuum of gold productivity. And let's look closely at it, though, and ask, is it resilient? So that wheat field, as a great wheat field, is subject to disease. One disease can take out the entire wheat field. That wheat field is subject to changes in climate. So a slight change in the climatic conditions can result in the disappearance of that wheat field. That wheat field is subject to our deciding that, no, we don't like gluten. And suddenly, that wheat field is not the popular consumption. The wheat field as a monoculture may be productive, but is not resilient. No monoculture is resilient. But you can't strengthen that wheat field by simply changing the top of it. You can't strengthen it by changing the middle. You can only change the resilience of that field by starting at the roots and working up. These are changing times, and CNU needs to be resilient. So it does no good to have a diverse board, nor are you likely to achieve a diverse board unless you have a diverse membership. And you're unlikely to have a diverse membership unless you have programs that are recognized as important by a diverse population. No one needs to leave the room, but we need to invite many more people into the room. If we're going to be the experts on urban spaces, we need to understand them through the eyes of all of the urban residents. So we're fortunate today to have our speaker this morning, Antwi Akom. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Institute for Sustainable Economic, Educational, and Environmental Design, and associate professor of Environmental Sociology, Public Health, and STEM Education at San Francisco State University. His work includes developing tools, ideas, and models that empower communities and improve planning and design processes, democratize data, and change the way social services are delivered to low-income communities and people of color. Antwi was recognized by the Partnership for Democracy and Education as one of 21 21st century eco-visionaries and was the keynote speaker for the 2014 Affordable Homes and Sustainable Communities Summit at Greenville. I know Antwi through his work with my client Eco Districts, where he serves on their board and he serves in the field to help change the way that organization and many communities are interfacing with their populations. And he also is helping with that organization's diversity journey. Today, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend, Dr. Antwi Akom.
Just give me a minute to get set up. What's happening, CNU? So great to be here. So I'm really honored at this invitation, and Dan, thank you for such a gracious introduction. Lynn and board, thank you for inviting me. CNU, I'm really honored and grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm leaving. So what I've come to talk about today is how do we redesign cities from the ground up? Let me get my little clicker going here so I don't have to turn around and look. Got it. Okay. So how do we democratizing design for people and by the people? And I want to start by talking about a real piece of wisdom that someone shared with me. They said, you either get better or you get worse. You never stay the same. And that's really what I've come to talk to all of you about today. How can organizations like the CNU that have been historically at the forefront of design, of architecture, of urban planning, of changing systems, how can organizations such as CNU that I deeply admire, how can you help make cities better? How can you help make our cities healthier, happier places to live, learn, work, and thrive? How can we build a bigger, better, more inclusive tent for urban design that doesn't focus so much on making the car culture better, but really begins to focus on people and places? And I start here because it's not enough to ask questions like, how can we build healthier cities? How can we build happier cities? How can we build greener cities? These are really important questions, and folks like Jan have addressed those questions. Folks like Charles Montgomery, folks like Lynn Richards, Majora Carter, John Knott, people affiliated with CNU and beyond CNU have addressed these questions. But to me, you can't talk about making cities healthier, happier, greener, without first really addressing real, deep, structural issues that have to do with race, class, gender, immigration, poverty, right, and their interconnections. And so the challenge of the 21st century, then, is how do we reimagine and redesign cities for folks and communities that have been locked out of sustainability conversations, that have been locked out of smart cities conversations, that have been locked out of the shareable cities conversation and locked out of the social justice conversation? How do we redesign our cities for, not for, but with, right? And this is a very important distinction that I want to make sure that everybody is recognizing, right? We need to stop designing our cities for communities and begin designing our cities with communities. So how do we redesign our cities, not for, but with communities that are experiencing unimaginable forms of social exclusion, of psychological trauma, of physical trauma, and economic distress? For communities that have limited access to food, that are suffering from unprecedented environmental health hazards and environmental toxins, while at the same time continuing to do what CNU and other organizations that look like you have done pretty well, which is take care and design for middle-class folks who are increasingly being squeezed by the economy, and at the same time continue to design for wealthier folks who play a really important role in the sustainability of our planet. Now, I call all this, I call all this eco-apartheid, right? And what is eco-apartheid? It's a systems theory that examines the ecological impacts of structural racialization. It highlights the ways that structures and institutions cumulatively cause and produce unequal built environment health benefits and burdens based on race, class, gender, immigration status, and their interconnections. Blah, 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 right? What does that mean, right? What is he talking about? So what I mean by eco-apartheid and what I mean by cumulative causation is I want all of you to put on your eco-imaginations right now. So all of you are dark-skinned. Feels good, doesn't it? All of a sudden you're loosening up a little bit, right? All right, all right. I like where he's going with this already. So you're dark-skinned, you're young, dark-skinned, right? Young, dark-skinned black youth living in West Oakland, okay? In your eco-imaginations, young, dark-skinned black youth living in West Oakland. And this is call and response in the way that the black church would call and respond. So how many grocery stores do you all have in your neighborhood, black children? More. That's right. All right, so we have one grocery store in our neighborhood. And how many liquor stores do we have in our neighborhood? 12, 20, 30. All right, you get the point, right? So depending on how they draw the boundaries of our neighborhood, right, we have between 40 and 50 liquor stores in our community, okay? Now, we're on our way to school, and we're hungry. Where are we going to stop and eat? The liquor store. It's a tricky crowd already. We're going to one of the 40 or 50 liquor stores on our way to school because we still want to get to school, right? So we stop in at the liquor store. And what kind of food are we going to eat at the liquor store? Chips, Wonder Bread. Right, hot fries, right? Takis, you know, whatever. My kids love this kind of food as well, right? So we're in the liquor store and we eat all that kind of food. And so we get all sugared up, right? Now, we're on our way to school and we're all sugared up. Now, what is the race and the gender of the majority of teachers in urban schools? White women, right? Now, this is not about race, nor is it about gender in the sense that any person can teach us black kids if they are well prepared, if they are committed, if they share purpose, if they share duty, and if they have a commitment to loving us, right? Anyone can bring us to our full potential and help us reach our full potential. Now remember, we're talking about eco-apartheid here, and we're talking about that blah, 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 cumulative causation, right? So when we get to school and we sit down in that classroom and we're all sugared up, what's the general diagnosis for us black children? That's it, right? So you said it, I didn't have to, right? That is cumulative causation, right? That is eco-apartheid, right? It's no fault of our own, the neighborhood that we live in. It's no fault of our own, the kind of access to fresh and healthy food that we have, right? But just because of where we live, we are being diagnosed, and now we're on meds, right? How's that impacting our life, right? How's that impacting our job prospects, our attitudes, our mood, our enthusiasm, our determination, our grit, our grind, right? So why is this important? Well, eco-apartheid is important for at least 3 reasons, right? First, it suggests that environmental bads like toxic waste are located in low-income communities and communities of color. Is that true? Absolutely. And environmental goods like whole foods, open space, parks are in wealthier communities, not like ours, in other communities. Is that true? Absolutely. Second, eco-apartheid is a more powerful definition than environmental racism because it captures inequalities beyond race, including race, space, place, and waste. For example, the urban grocery gap, which we just talked about. The transportation gap, because there's no jobs that are near our community, so it's taking on, and we only have one grocery store, and it's a bad grocery store, right? So even to get to the grocery store, we got to travel an hour and a half just to and from on a bus line that isn't even located near us. Or the bicycle gap, or the walkability gap of our neighborhood, right? While simultaneously centering race, racism, and their political implications. Third, eco-apartheid is important because it suggests that policy is not neutral, and it begins to shed light on the racial and the spatial reproduction of inequality. Now, what I mean here is that the history of the United States is the history of systematic, institutional, racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. Let me say that again, because a lot of times white people start slumping in their seat. Don't slump. Stay with me. Stay with me, my brothers and sisters. Stay with me. The history of America, we have to be real with ourselves if we want to heal, if we want to grow, right? That's the only way we're going to move forward, right? That's the only way we're going to build a bigger tent and invite people in, is if we are honest, right? And that includes being honest with ourselves. And that means the history of America is the history of systematic, institutionalized racial privilege for white people and white-looking people. That's important because there's lots of people of color that have been passing as white, and it's not because, now I'm letting out dirty laundry, black children, you know this, right? Stay in your eco-imagination. but some white folks don't know, lots of people of color have been passing historically, right? In order to have access to institutional resources and privilege, it is not because folks did not love who they are, where they're from, their own culture, right? It's because they had to pass in order to access scarce institutional resources and privileges that they otherwise would not have. So this holds true, this racial privilege, and the history of America being the history of institutional racial privilege for white folks, whether we are talking about the Naturalization Law of 1790, the first law passed by Congress after the Constitution was ratified, which said whites and whites only could be free citizens of the United States, right? Or whether we're talking about the Homestead Act of 1862, which guaranteed white folks 160 acres of land. It's a lot of land for 10 bucks. And black folks and people of color, we couldn't get 40 acres and a mule. Or whether we're talking about federally subsidized, federally underwritten FHA and VHA loans. On the backs of those loans was the creation of the white middle class. And when we do it for people of color and black folks, we call it welfare. But when we do it for white folks, we call it good, sound economic policy. That's real talk, isn't it? That's about as real as it can get. And as a result of these systematic, institutionalized racial privilege, the average white family has 20 times, right, the average net worth than the average black family, 18 times more the average net worth than the average Latino family. Not solely because of hard work, right? Not solely because of better morals, not solely because of better values, right? But because of systematic, institutionalized racial privileges passed from one generation to the next, especially when I was talking about housing, right, and redlining. So my grandmother could not buy a house. This is within living memory. This is in Portland, Oregon. She lives in Portland, came from Louisiana to Portland, right? She's 94 years old. She couldn't buy a house, right? Now, the good news is a well-meaning white person, but remember, y'all are black youth right now for the sake of this conversation, helped her buy a house, and that's part of my message and part of our message, right? How we can work together, right? But it's important to know that there was a possibility of her not having a way to pass on her home, which is the most valuable asset most of us have, right, if we wouldn't have gotten that kind of help. Now, what's going on here? Now, we know how this works in terms of wealth, but what about health, right? What about the life expectancy gap? What about healthy schools and sick schools? What about, I'm going to use this word that Lynn doesn't like because it's true in this case, winner regions and loser regions, right? And look, I love the work of this happiness conversation, but I want to put happiness and joy in the context of trauma, right? And I think what happiness is doing is the right answer. Let's build more open spaces, right? Let's build more parks. Let's find out the psychological places that bring people joy, right? But we need to be doing it in relationship to toxic stress, right? And we need to understand the ways in which race, class, gender can lead to stress and very stressful situations that impact our happiness, our health, and our well-being. And I don't want that part of the conversation to be left out of the happiness and joyful city conversation. So to me, we have not correctly identified the problem. The U.S. Green Building Council, Eco Districts, Green Star, other certification and rating systems have done a brilliant job of setting top-down ambitious goals around the built environment. I call that the hardware. But what about the software? What about the social environment of community, culture, the power of place, what people care about and are experiencing and know to be happening on the ground level? Baltimore, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Baltimore. Right? Baltimore is burning because of a hardware problem and a software problem. Right? The hardware problem is structural inequality, the lack of access to jobs, to schools, to parks. But the software problem is the ways that young black males and not so young black males and women and other people of color are perceived by the police. That's a software problem. How people are perceiving us black children, right? And it's not just the police, this perception. It's good, well-meaning people that look a lot like us. How we're perceiving black youth and other people of color, right? That's a software problem. How do I know it's a software problem? Because the United States has 5% of the world's population, but we house 20% of the world's prisoners, right? 1 out of every 5 people locked up anywhere in the world is locked up in a United States jail or prison, and they're mostly black and Latino and poor. And what about those of us who somehow make it out of the hood of a really tough situation? What about those of us who get an undergraduate degree in economics from UC Berkeley and get a master's degree from Stanford University and have an Ivy League PhD? What happens to us? Who's this? Who is this? It's me, and I'm pissed off, right? I do not look happy in that picture. Right? And anyone who does a cursory Google search of me will see that I was unjustly incarcerated. My civil rights violated, people, my brothers and sisters, violated with my 2 children, one age 5, the other one age 7, in the car, driving to my office, okay, at 10:30 at night. Can I get down from here? Or is someone filming this? Well, I was going to walk. Can I walk? Stretching it out, man. Telling my story. You know? Getting to know people. Getting to know people. This is like real. This is my life. I want to share my life with people, right? So 10:30 at night, I'm a first-year professor, okay? I'm a single dad with 2 kids. Right? One age 5, the other one age 7, 2 girls. And now I see the camera, so I'm going to scoot back up here because I forgot they're filming this. Sorry, camera. Anyway, so I live in Berkeley. I scoot over the Bay Bridge. I get to the university. I park. I'm in dilemma mode because my kids fell asleep on the way, but I need these books because I'm like, I don't know, OCD about prepping for my classes, and I love my students. So I'm like, oh, I really want to get this. I really want to get this stuff. I'm looking at my kids, really want to get this book, and I'm like, all right. So I pull up really close, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to run into this building. I'm going to grab my books. I'm going to run out. And it's going to take me about, I don't know, 45 seconds or like maybe a minute and 30 seconds max. So I zoom. Right? And for some reason that night, there was a security guard at the door, right? But you know, whatever, I'm a professor there, so I'm not thinking twice about it. So I zoom past him, I get into my office, I open the door, and my books are right there. I grab my books, and I guess it took more than a minute 30 seconds because By the time I come out, but it was not that long, there is a 22-year-old police officer who walks up to me and says, "Put your hands behind your back." Now, right, I had this sort of, that look of like, and then what came out of my mouth, which shouldn't, black children, come out of your mouth, right? Stay with me in the eco-imagination, was why? Seemed very logical, but that's not what you should say to the police, black children. Don't ask why, just do what they say. This is real talk. This is life and death talk, right? So I said, why? And he said, "Put your hands behind your back, or I'm going to make you put your hands behind your back." Now, right here, I'm like literally, from me to you, is my office door, which says Dr. Antwi Akom, right? He hasn't asked me for my ID. He hasn't asked me for anything, okay? And in the next instance, with my books, he knocks the books out of my hand, and he drops down to his knees and tries to wrestle me to the ground. So now I've got this 22-year, I didn't know he was 22 at the time, but young boy, man boy, right, wrapped around me, trying to wrestle me to the ground, and I'm not small, just how God made me, accept what you are. And there's somebody, like from me to the CNU red thing back there, roughly, sir, and because it's a long hallway, just like this, and he's wrestling me, and I'm balancing, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's wrestling me, and then I look up and I said, help, right? And in the next blink of an eye, 2 more black cops come running up the stairs. And one of them takes out mace, and I put the mace down. What is going on, right? And they're basically, at this point, they don't have anything really to say because there's nothing going on. So they say, listen, we just want to talk to you. We want to handcuff you. We're going to handcuff you. We want to handcuff you. And I was very resistant to that idea. And you, I would imagine, black children, and whatever you are in your real life, you would be resistant to that too. But I wasn't resistant visibly, let me be clear. I'm talking just like this. And so they say, we want to handcuff you and talk to you, and then we'll let you go. I said, hey, do what you got to do. My kids are in the car, and I've exceeded my 30 seconds. Right? So they're like, no problem. They handcuff me, walk me down, put me in the back of the police car, and then say, you have 1 phone call. And if that person doesn't answer, we're taking your kids away to Child and Protective Services. Exactly. That feeling that you just felt, for those of you who have children, right? And for those of you who don't but can imagine it, I have never felt this kind of feeling before in my life. And it made me think about slavery, to be honest. It made me think about, and I want you to go into your own eco-imagination again and think about, what would it be like to have your mom sold, your wife, your daughter, your son? What would that feeling be like to sit there and just watch that go down? Inside of you, what would that do to you? Right? Beyond the tears and the frustration, what would that do to you? Right? What kind of intergenerational legacy would that leave inside of you to watch somebody do that to you? Right? And we can get into it even more on slavery and that kind of stuff in terms of the abuse and the misuse of women, right? You can imagine what that would do to you to watch that go down to your wife, to someone who you love. So I'm sitting in the car with my hands behind my back. I don't know if you've ever been handcuffed. It's extremely uncomfortable, right? It's tight on my wrist, and I'm feeling all these different emotions, and I'm trying to stay centered, right? But I'm having trouble with it. I'm struggling to stay calm. And I make the phone call to one of my friends, and he answers the phone. Thank God, right? And he comes over, and that's good. And they take me away. Now, I'm going to have to fast forward because we're probably going to run out of time, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but it's a very compelling story, right? So they end up taking me to jail for way too long, and some good things happen out of this in terms of, if you can say there's a silver lining, first of all, I'm in jail, and I learned something that I'm going to talk about again in a minute. There's some really brilliant people locked up. There is wasting talent just locked up. So that was important, just that lesson for me. Then a white lawyer by the name of John Kecker, who cross-examined Oliver North in the Iran-Contra affair, came forward and said, I'm going to take your case, Antwi, pro bono. I got you. This is totally wrong, and I'm going to give you all of my counsel, no problem. So it also showed me that even within privilege, I still had my own kind of privilege going on because of my education, because of my own status, right? That was an important lesson and something to be grateful for. And then the university at first thought I was going to sue them. So the cops did what cops do, which you're learning now. They lie, right? So the 22-year-old was like, he picked me up, he body slammed me, he threw me against the wall, he did all this stuff. And the judge, luckily he was 22, so he wasn't very savvy, a savvy liar. So he went to like the WWE type of motion picture thing, right? And the judge was like, but you don't have a scratch on you, right? He was like, oh yeah, I guess not, you know, right? So, but at first I was up for like 4 felonies, right? So that all got dropped. But the university was still like, well, what really went down, right? And my whole integrity was questioned until a billionaire white family came in who had more money than the whole CSU system and said, we will resource you for whatever you need, attack. And then when they said that, the university was like, we're sorry. We're terribly sorry, Dr. Akom. Right? Before I wasn't even Dr. Akom, I was like a teacher. I wasn't a professor. First of all, I love teachers, but to them, it's like he's a teacher, you know, right? So that happened to me, and I was the poster boy for racial profiling, y'all. And then Dr. Henry Louis Gates, who's a professor at Harvard, got messed with by the police. And then I turned from the poster boy to the national expert, right? So you know how that happens, right? Let's call him, he knows, right? So then I became the national expert, and they had me on PBS with Jim Lear, and we got to talk about it, and I remember one of the questions was like, well, what should you do when the police come? And I was like, listen to everything they say. It's like, good answer, good answer. So what's valuable about this conversation for all of you is that race and cities really do matter, right? And I think it's a conversation that we overlook too much, and we need, as designers, as architects, as urban planners, to just rethink this whole thing, reimagine it, redesign it, and we need to do the hard work together and stop being afraid to talk about it, right? It matters in terms, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It matters in terms of how cities are structured, that is the shape of the city, and it matters in terms of how you black children, your personal experiences as you navigate public and private space. Race is always there, coloring our psychology, our physiology, our perceptions of place, and our access to institutional resources and privileges. So is gender, right? So is sexual orientation and other intersections of inequality. In my own case, what we should take out of this is that race subsumes social class. And that's really important for all of us. Because the big argument when I generally get in front of audiences like this is that it's really more about class, Antwi. It's not about race. Does that sound familiar? I mean, and I told you I'm pouring my heart and soul out to you, right? Because remember, what happened to me and what happens to a lot of black people, and if you read Cornel West's Race Matters, he talks about it. I mean, honestly, Obama could go to New York City right now and may not be able to catch a cab in certain neighborhoods, right? Race subsumes social class. There's racism in the heart of liberalism. Oftentimes, folks racially profile whole communities, right? When I think of what's going down in Baltimore, I hear the police over and over saying, don't judge us, don't judge one of us for the actions that we've done. You know, don't judge the whole department for the actions of one of us. But is that what they say to you, black youth? No. There's a whole ideology, a whole perception of who you all are, of who we are, because I'm with you, right? And if you come into our communities, gentrification to us is just another word for ethnic cleansing. And so in my own case, what we said is, this could have happened to any of us, and every day it happens to many of us. So what can be done? What if I said to you that the best way to build healthy, happy, high-performing neighborhoods is not from the top down, but rather it's from the bottom up, right? What if I said that for the past several centuries, designers, architects, and urban planners have been doing it wrong, that we actually have it upside down? Because we've been, instead of designing for the 100%, which is all of you, we've been designing for the 1%, which is just a few of you. If you accept this idea and think we need to change, I offer 3 guiding principles to you, CNU. 1, we need to start designing with social integration as at the forefront, right? Instead of designing cities with a cultural quarter, a living quarter, a business quarter, right? In equitable cities of the future, each neighborhood will have access to high-performing infrastructure. Doesn't that make sense? Good jobs, good schools, high-performing infrastructure. Because architecture is not as much about building making as it is about place making, right? And solving social problems and creating new conditions. The next guiding principle I suggest for all of us is that small is big. Because in the 20th century, we fell into the industrial mindset of let's supersize everything, right? And we acquired whole neighborhoods and stuffed them into this single monolithic box of one size will fit everything. Alistair Parvin says, what if it's possible now for cities to be made not just by the few with a lot, but also by the many with a little bit? What would it mean for cities to be made by people with completely different sets of social, cultural, environmental values about the places they live, learn, work, pray, play? I would add, would this change how we plan our cities? Would this change how we think about walkability? If you all black children were designing the cities with those other folks in that CNU conference, right? Would it change how we think about bikeability, about how we finance development, how we deliver public services? What would it mean for democratic societies to offer all residents the right to build, collaboratively, cooperatively, and collectively to participate in community engagement. And the final piece here is, what if we tapped into technology and the Internet of Things to really communicate with those residents that are on the margins? Because mobile technology is the new gold. So my design challenge for all of you is, if we could design smarter, more shareable, safer, more sustainable, and more socially just cities, what would they look like? Would we design them for rich people or for poor people? For eco-haves or eco-have-nots? For people of color or for white folks? And who would have a say in how we redesign our cities of the future? Would it be powerful elites or everyday people? These are important questions because the fastest growing cities are not skyscraper cities as you see on the right, but rather they're informal settlements, ghettos and slums as you see on the left. And we can either continue to do what we've been doing, which is viewing the 1 billion people who come to these informal settlements in search of a better life and jobs as 1 billion problems, or we can do something different and begin to view them as 1 billion potential solutions. Because there is genius in the ghetto, there is genius in the hood, there is genius in the barrio. And because of rapid urbanization and demographic shifts, guess where our design teams of the future are going to come from? Many are going to come from communities that look just like this. Give me 5 more minutes. Now, if we're going to talk about innovation out of poverty, it's important that we visualize it. So what you're looking at now is a global map of innovation from outer space. And it's really easy to tell where the innovation is happening. This is brought to you by Toby Shapshak. Do you see all the places that are lit up with all the electricity? That's where innovation isn't happening. So where is innovation happening? One of the places that it's happening is in Detroit. This is Pashawn Murray, right? She's founder of Detroit Dirt. And the problem that she was facing is that no other city in the United States has undergone such dramatic population decline, urban decay, and abandonment as the city of Detroit. Her big idea was, why don't you take waste, leaves, manure, restaurant waste, make compost out of it, and go to abandoned lots and make beautiful community gardens. And by embodying an innovation out of poverty mindset, she was able to demonstrate to us how she can lower transportation gaps, transform food deserts into food oasis, and reduce environmental footprints, create business, and restore a sense of pride in the power of place. Detroit, I have other examples, but I'm out of time. So
Good morning. My name is Morgan Dixon. I'm out for my morning walk. I'm a part of an organization called Girltrek that has rallied and mobilized 10,000 black women and girls to take a step out and to walk for their health together across the country from our communities out of the front door. We walk 5 days a week, 30 minutes a day, for 8 weeks straight to restart, jumpstart, kickstart healthier lives and to combat these statistics that say we're going to die earlier, younger, at higher rates than any other group in the country. 4 out of 5 of us are over a healthy weight. All of this is preventable. We know that walking changes things. When black women walk together, it has always changed things. When women in Montgomery walked, it changed. When Harriet Tubman walked, it changed. And when we walk, things will change. I look forward to telling you more about this incredible organization. 10,000 women are on the streets now, from places like Chattanooga to Detroit, and we are walking it out for our health. Look forward to talking to you more.
She's powerful. All right, so I've given some examples of democratizing design and bottom-up strategies. And these raise really interesting questions about how to build our cities with the 100% instead of for the 100%, because the mother of innovation is never driven by a few individuals, like Henry Ford or the IKEA family, those folks who democratized consumption, but rather the roots of innovation have always been fueled by millions of grassroots people empowered to create new ways of surviving and thriving, and thus who democratized consumption and democratized production. Thank you very much for your time.